Hi, this is Michelle Capobianco. I'm the CEO of Pancreatic Cancer Canada, and you're listening to our podcast, Unapologetic.
Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with death doula Kayla Moryoussef. We're looking forward to digging a little deeper into the topic of end of life and how to prepare for it. What do you see, because we are funding some of the research into helping people through just the end of life distress, whether that's through psilocybin, magic mushrooms, or other psychedelic drugs. What do you see, if it can't be part of a clinical trial, that people are willing to use to help lower that distress? Is it meditation, or what do you see people bringing into their lives at the end?
Honestly, I'm going to be very self-promoting here, but death doulas. I've worked with a lot of people who have said, we worked with the counselors, we worked with social workers, we worked with psychologists, psychiatrists, the spiritual advisors of whatever religion, of all religions. Nobody was able to do what you were able to do. And that's because this is my this is my expertise, is end of life.
How does one find a death doula?
There's INELDA, which is INELDA, which is like a national register of death doulas. If you just search death doula and your city, I'm sure that you'll get lots of hits. But also now there's lots of associations. So there's like the Death Doula Association of Ontario. You could contact them. You could contact a local hospice. Some hospices have death doulas that they might know, or associations that they might work with that have death doulas. So I would check an association. There are lots of, like I said, geographical usually associations. I know there's one in BC, there's one for Canada, there's one for Ontario, there's an international one. And usually you can find through there. Otherwise, just your city name and the death doula and see what comes up for hits. I often, just remember, death doulas aren't a regulated profession. So you can't expect them to be like, they're not covered. They're not going to be covered by insurance, and they're not going to be regulated by like a college or anything.
Right.
So look for like where they did their training, or maybe how long they've been active for. And I consider volunteering activity. I put in about 9 years of sweat equity before I ever started getting paid for this work.
And what is the pay scale? What do people should they expect to pay for this service?
Well, I work on a sliding scale, so it's anywhere. So I don't usually give the numbers out, but it's anywhere between 50 to 200 an hour, depending on the type of work and what the resources of the client are. And then I do take on pro bono clients every year, because obviously there are people who pay me to the higher end of my scale, which enables me to do that. So it depends on the nature of the work and the resources of the client. And I work on an honor system. You don't have to explain to me why you think you fall where you fall. And if I get bit a few times in my career, I get bit. So be it. I've never been bitten. People have been really honest and really generous. And I've been able to serve people who can't afford me and serve people who clearly very well could.
Fabulous. Okay. What would you say are some of the common misconceptions or fears about death? You said one of them, certainly, that it's going to be traumatic.
But it's going to be traumatic, that it comes with a lot of suffering, painful suffering, where like, that's the one thing our system is here for. That's the one thing that medicine is here for, to alleviate the pain, right? One thing I feel like I can count on the doctors for, if you advocate, if you are clear, if you like, and so sometimes I have to be like, are you communicating this with your doctors, with my clients? But if you communicate with your doctors at the end of life, they will try and make it as pain-free as possible. And that is one thing I feel pretty secure about.
The only thing that I would, though, add to it as a caveat to that is so many patients are concerned about opioids. Well, about opioids and becoming addicted to it, which I hear all the time, which is crazy to me. But they worry about it. And then also they worry about how aware they're going to be through those last moments. They want to be really aware. They don't want to be out of it.
So those are conversations you have when you're planning for your end of life. How cognizant do you want to be? The trade-off, right? How cognizant do you want to be? How much pain do you want to be? But the suffering piece, you don't suffer, like people don't really suffer at the end of life. Research has shown that most people when they know they're dying, at some point before they die, come to terms with the fact that they're dying. So die with a peace that they're dying. So it's, I would want people to know that.
That's really important.
Yeah, I would want people to know that. I feel that learning that information was really like a peaceful moment for me, to know that most people who know they're dying come to terms with it. And that's even in sudden death. If there is time, people will find a way in their brain to come to terms with the fact that they're dying.
That would be so important for their loved ones to know, because I talk to people all the time who are still grieving the way their family member passed. I speak with one gentleman who talks about his mother sharing with him before she died how scared she was.
Right.
And he doesn't have that sense that she ever came to peace about it. And to know that the majority of people do would probably be really heartwarming for him.
Yeah. And I think I remind people that the deaths they've been exposed to, even personally, because some people are exposed to a lot of personal traumatic deaths. If you plan for yours, and if you do put in the work, that little bit of work, it doesn't have to be yours. Like what you witnessed with your parents doesn't have to be what happens with you and for your children. People get really stuck with what they've seen or experienced is what's going to happen to them. And you don't, just like we rewrite legacies, right? We've really problematically done a lot of things to the dying and death process in Western culture, and we need to rewrite those legacies within our communities.
Tell me more about your death cafes, where people can find out about them. I've attended some before, and I really enjoyed them, and I was shocked by the diversity of people that were there.
Cafe, I was at a table with two 84-year-old Lutheran women. I'm agnostic at best. They were Lutheran and they were 84, and then a gentleman, middle-aged gentleman who was a funeral director. So that was really fun. I learned a lot and I was hooked. So I help run death cafes through Home Hospice Association. So I know best their death cafes, which you can find out about through at homehospiceassociation.com/death cafes. And the cool thing about them is we have LGBTQ death cafes. We have pet loss death cafes. We have a Spoonie Death Cafe, which I run for people with chronic pain and chronic illness, which I have chronic pain and chronic illness. So I know that people with disabilities and chronic pain and chronic illness tend to experience their mortality daily and differently than their able-bodied counterparts. So the dialogue needs to be different. So we hold space for that. And so there's a bunch of other community specific death cafes and general ones, virtual and slowly, more surely in person. Otherwise, if you're looking for one in person in your community, just Google Death Cafe and your community. And I'm pretty sure there's listings at deathcafe.com. And if you want to run your own one, there's a whole program guide on deathcafe.com because it's an international movement.
Fabulous. Can we switch topics a little wee bit to talk about spirituality?
Yeah.
I have found that a lot of people near end of life or at end of life really either turn to what their original religion was or start looking at others and start trying to find meaning beyond that. And so how have you found people embrace their spirituality at the end? And have you worked with different spiritual leaders, and how open are they to you being part of this process?
I haven't really worked with different spiritual leaders. I've worked with a ton of different people of different religions who were quite religious. Incidentally, most recently, my client I worked with for almost a year was religious, and I didn't know. I knew he was believed in God and read the Bible. We talked about it a lot, but I thought he was a theologian. And it wasn't until I went to his funeral that I realized he was raised Catholic and was Catholic. But that never interfered with the work we did. And, I was never unable to remind him of what he believed in because the narrative was the narrative, right? So I've worked with people of all religions, but not really the faith-based leaders so much. I have been invited by churches to run death cafes and stuff. So the more liberal ones are more receptive. I think, we have at Home Hospice Association, there are death doulas who operate more within their religion of that they practice. And then there's a lot of death doulas who are more humanistic or secular and just operate with everyone. My kind of philosophy is that I've believed in a lot of things. I believe in what the client believes in with them and for them wholeheartedly. And so I've believed in a lot of things throughout the course of my career. And I truly believe like there are infinite versions of heaven. I think where you go, where you think you're going, if it's pleasant.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'd love to know about some of the stories of having children involved in the process. And I think about a patient in British Columbia earlier last year who had a death doula and had his whole family around. And after he passed, the death doula encouraged his grandsons to shave him to get him ready for the next step.
This is super cool. I think that's a really empowering thing. I haven't worked with children a lot. I've kind of more by degrees of separation. I've facilitated events, family events, where I knew the children were at. I had a client who, when I came in, I said, "What do you want to do before you die?" Which is one of the questions none of these other people, these social workers, spiritual advisors, psychologists, nobody had asked them. Nobody asked her this. And so I said, "What do you want to do before you die? Are there things you'd like to do again?" And so she listed off some things. And one of the things was to go to the zoo. But she was on chemo, so she was high risk. And this was still during COVID. So I called the zoo. I didn't call. I went online, couldn't find any emails. So I just emailed everybody who worked at the zoo and said, "This is the situation. Is there anything you can do for us?" And lo and behold, we had a family day behind the scenes at the zoo. So they weren't with the general crowds. They got to go into some of the exhibits and play with the polar bears and stuff, have a family barbecue behind the scenes. So they, everything was safe, and the whole family went, the kids went, and they knew this was like one of their aunt's final wishes, and it was great. So in that way, kids are included. I've talked to clients about the various ways, like if they're a pre-grieving client and they have a loved one who's going to die, the various ways to have conversations with their kids about the impending death, but never directly. That's just happenstance. I'm not closed off to it.
Interesting. So let's talk about some of those questions that people worry about and that they don't know who to ask. Some of them that spring to mind that I hear often is, how soon am I going to die?
Right.
And the oncologist doesn't want to tell them. The nurse navigator doesn't want to tell them. It's often the death doula who will say to them, it's in the next 24 hours or has a sense of when it's going to be. So how do you answer that question when people ask you?
I don't know. And I've had palliative clients who have lived for 7 years. And I've had palliative clients who have gone in and I never saw them again the next week. Right. So my answer is always like, I don't know. I can't tell you that. But what I do know is if we prioritize what you want to get done and we get it done, then everything else is just bonus time. Let's look at it as like all bonus time. Let's plan for, you want to get everything done by whatever. I'll say that sounds like bonus time to me. I'll call it bonus time. And I'll be like, let's aim for everything being done by spring. And if you get till August, then all that time was bonus time.
So let's talk about what happens to your body as you're approaching death. Mm-hmm. Because you talked about taste leaving. So let's talk about some of the other things that happen in the last couple of hours, the last hour, because this is a big question for people that nobody wants to answer for them.
Yeah. So I'd have to study up again on some of it. I haven't answered this question in a while. But
I'm not looking for anything scientific. I'm really just meaning one of the questions I get asked all the time is, will I lose my control of my bowels? They want to know some of those specific things and how to prepare for them.
Well, not everyone does. And, here's the whole thing. I always say there's a lot of shit in dying, and it's one of the most intimate parts of dying. Can I say that word?
You just did. All good.
There's a lot of poop in dying, and it's one of the more intimate things. And often it depends on the cancer or on the disease. But it will happen. That'll happen long before active dying. And that's a thing I often include in the line of questioning when people, where is your line for what is quality of life for you? Right? A lot of people say, I don't want people changing my diaper, or I don't want people taking care of my feces. And that's a very hard line for them about where their quality of life significantly decreases. So if death causes it, I try and just tell people not to worry about what happens when they're gone. But I find people really worry about what they've historically called the death rattle, which is the chains something breathing. And that's not painful. That's not choking. It's a little bit of water gathering in the throat. It can be suctioned out, but often that's more uncomfortable. So it's more uncomfortable to hear, and it's more uncomfortable by title than it is for the dying person. So I will say that much. They called it the wrong thing, and it doesn't sound pleasant, but it's not painful and it's not choking.
Yeah, I've been with patients during the time of the death rattle, and it's disconcerting for those of you listening to it, but it clearly isn't affecting the patient at all.
Yeah, it's very helpful to know it's not choking and that it's not causing suffering for the patient. And that I always remind clients of that, and also that it was just really poorly named.
What about any sense? I also talk to patients who very shortly before they pass, so that I'm talking to the family members about them seeing family members who have already passed.
Yeah.
Seeing light, seeing family members.
I think that's lovely. I think that's lovely. I had a client who saw his dogs, who had died. I think that's lovely and comforting, whether that's, who knows why that happens, right? But I'd say go with it. That's, I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. And I just think it must be offering, like, for wherever it's coming from, if it's offering comfort to the dying person, then let's try and see that as beautiful. How does it make you feel as the loved one to the dying person? And I'll offer counsel if it's hard for the loved ones, right?
I agree.
But most of the time it offers comfort to the dying person, and that's the function wherever it's coming from.
So let's talk a bit about the premise behind the book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it made an impact on you. Let's talk about what those regrets are and why they impacted you, why it impacted you.
So I came across this Guardian article years ago, right at the beginning of my death doula career, I guess. And it was the top 5 regrets of the dying. And I, after reading it, I was like, well, if I know what the regrets of the dying are, could I live my life every day to avoid those regrets? And I do, and it's completely changed my life. So it's something I always try and impart to other people. And usually one, if not several, really resonate with people. So in no particular order, they are, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends, and I wish that I had let myself be happier. Yeah. So I know these things now, and I think about them every day, and not in a morbid way. It's just, I think of my life in terms of deathbed regrets. Like, how can I live to not have deathbed regrets?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
It's helpful information, I think.
Really helpful information, and really helpful for those of us working with people who are at end of life to remember for ourselves. Because the one question I wanted to ask you is how you and how you actively separate yourself from it. I know that my staff and I actively work at, after we've spoken with somebody and once we've developed a relationship with a family, and you have very close relationships with them right up until the end, and then sometimes it just literally ends at that point. But how you then sort of shut your computer down and go off and be with your family and do your job and not carry that sadness with you.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. The first thing is that I get to know that I'm making a shitty time or a bad time a little less bad. And so I really try and frame it that way. I really try and remember that, like, what I get to do is be a bit of a silver lining. And that's a really beautiful, happy, empowering, lovely thing. Like, I get to make it a little less bad. The other thing is if I take it on, it's not my grief. It's not my sadness. It's not my story. It's theirs. So I don't want to co-opt it. And if I take it on, I can't do my job. And I really want to be able to do my job. I'm good at it, and it supports people. And so if I take on everyone's grief fully, I can't do my job. There are times I also have a therapist. I also have a mentor. I do have to talk things through. It's not always easy. I'm a human. I'm feeling. I told one of my client families that it's hard because you make friends and you lose friends. That's the nature of this work. You make a lot of friends and you lose a lot of friends. But I had a hospice worker once tell me that I'm really lucky because I'm going to have a lot of friends waiting for me on the other side, a whole team of people waiting for me on the other side. And I don't know what I believe in, but if it's true, I really like that idea. So I hold on to that. And I just really hold on to the fact that it's not my grief. And if I take it on as my grief, I can't do my job. And when it's hard, I take the time I need to self-care and to talk to the people I need to and process. But I really want to be able to do my job. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been fabulous. I really hope that this is just the start of our conversations, because there's so much more we need to talk about and develop together for people at end of life. So I really want to thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about us, visit www.pancreaticcancercanada.ca and stay tuned for the next episode of Unapologetic.